Now, as I said before, because Class G airspace is uncontrolled airspace, when I'm flying IFR, I call it go carefully airspace. IFR or VFR, you can fly in Class G without ever having to talk to air traffic control. Why the difference? Well, in uncontrolled airspace, ATC provides no separation service for IFR flights. What this means is that in uncontrolled airspace, a VFR pilot can fly much closer to the clouds and be legal because it's less likely that he'll see an IFR airplane come out of a cloud. So in uncontrolled airspace, the distance required from clouds for VFR airplanes is less and the weather minimums are less. We'll talk about those requirements later. When we're looking at the classes of airspace, we'll use VFR charts since it's when you're flying VFR that you need to worry most about the airspace rules. Now, when you look at a chart, everything is Class G airspace unless it is designated otherwise. So Class G is shown on a chart by the absence of any other airspace class. And Class G airspace goes from the surface up to the base of any overlying airspace. Usually, that will be 700 feet or 1,200 feet above ground level, but it could be as high as 14,500 feet MSL. Let's take a look at the area with this magenta vignette. In this particular case, we have controlled airspace with a 700-foot AGL floor, shown by the fuzzy side of the magenta. Now, when you're on the fuzzy side of the magenta in here, you have Class G airspace under the floor of controlled airspace, and that means you have Class G from the surface to 700 feet AGL. Now, sometimes you'll have a floor of controlled airspace shown with blue. When you have a floor of controlled airspace shown by the fuzzy side of the blue, like so, that's a floor of controlled airspace at 1,200 feet AGL. Inside the fuzzy side of the blue, in here, Class G airspace goes from the surface to 1,200 feet AGL. Now, as I said, Class G airspace goes from the surface to the base of any overlying controlled airspace. So if you're on the distinct side of the blue vignette, out here, the Class G airspace goes from the surface up to 14,500 feet MSL. That's because all the airspace in the lower 48 states and Alaska at and above 14,500 feet MSL is controlled airspace. Now, there is an exception to this, but it's pretty rare unless you're flying around in Alaska. If you are in high mountains, and Mount McKinley is about as high as you're going to get in the U.S., then Class G airspace may not stop at 14,500 feet MSL. Unless it's designated otherwise, Class G airspace goes up to 1,500 feet AGL, even if that's above 14,500 feet MSL. Not an uncommon situation if you're wandering around Alaska. Now, this blue vignette right here, you will not see that in the eastern United States. That's because almost all the airspace, in fact, I'd go so far as to say all the airspace in the eastern part of the U.S. is controlled airspace above either 700 feet or 1,200 feet AGL. So they will not show this distinction on the chart. They don't even show the fuzzy side of the blue because they don't need to. Now, what is the significance to you and me of flying IFR in Class G airspace? Well, first of all, if you're in the clouds, you better hope you're the only aircraft in there, because as the uncontrolled implies, ATC provides no control or separation. And secondly, because VFR pilots can be much closer to the clouds in Class G airspace, you might find yourself face to face with a guy flying VFR shortly after you pop out of a cloud. So Class G may mean go for it when I'm flying VFR, but when I'm IFR, I go carefully there.